After World War II, for almost 50 years, the KGB reigned as the most effective intelligence agency the world has ever seen. The key to its success was a ruthless skill for using money, sex, and blackmail as tools to entice foreigners to betray their countries and hand over secret information. Now, never-before-seen documents and films we have uncovered afford a new look into the KGB. They expose new details about those who fell into the webs of carefully laid KGB traps and the widespread ramifications of their betrayal. But most frightening of all, in an exclusive interview, the highest-ranking Russian military officer to ever defect reveals that the Soviets positioned terrorist weapons, including nuclear bombs, inside the US and other countries, weapons that are still in place and ready to be activated even today.
Throughout much of the 20th century, the Soviet Union's super spy agency, known as the KGB, had in its possession thousands of secrets gained through covert intelligence operations.
But there were secrets that were even more highly classified than those the spies brought in. These were the details of the inner workings of the KGB itself, the extreme methods the agency employed, the identities of spies that betrayed their homelands for the Russians, and the inside information on the various covert operations the Soviets developed abroad. And the most top secret of all was the very existence of special forces operations that were poised within Western countries to execute sinister orders if war became imminent.
Now that the Cold War is ended, some of this hidden information has been smuggled out of carefully guarded vaults in what used to be the Soviet Union. Astounding information we are now just beginning to get our hands on may be just the tip of the iceberg. Join us as we uncover the secret KGB files. With the change to a market economy here, many things never before available to Russians are finding their way to store shelves. Some point to this as evidence of a new prosperity. Others claim that this only fosters greed not seen during the Soviet era. They say that everything is for sale in the new Russia, including state secrets and the spies who kept them.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union came the dissolving of the KGB. The new government formed its own security and intelligence agencies, employing many of the old KGB personnel, but leaving many without jobs. Even those with employment were often not paid as promised. We found that many former KGB employees were eager to give first-hand accounts of their classified activities within the agency for the right price. And they directed us to black market sources where we might obtain documentation. Though most leads proved to be ultimately unproductive, we found that with perseverance, money, and a bit of luck, it is possible to acquire classified Soviet documents. Using a hidden camera, we recorded numerous meetings over a period of months in which we attempted to obtain relevant materials. This transaction between one of our Moscow contacts and black market dealers proved to be one of the more successful ventures, though, as you'll see, not without a few tense moments.
I see. It looks good. That's what I'm talking about. We need more money. But our deal was $5,000, right? So what? We got you much more. Look, it's twice more than you expected, right? But everything you were This is about what I expected. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. And we need to pay our man. We need to, take care of stuff. Our deal is 5,000. That's all I have. Okay, so, we need more money. I'm talking, we need more money, okay? Like, we can get, okay, let's do that. Like, give us 5,000, and that's okay, and the rest you can give, like, tomorrow, the next day, like, whatever. 5,000 is the deal. That's it, I can't do that. This is all I have. Okay, so we'll take 200. Hey, run up!
Finally, safe from the black market dealers, within some of these documents we found corroboration for the most valuable piece of information related to us by the ex-KGB agents, just as we had been told. Indeed, the KGB carefully recorded their activities in documents, films, and tapes. And these were kept in storage in a holding facility beneath the KGB headquarters, under the highest security. These were probably the most sensitive records possessed by the agency, for they would illuminate in graphic detail the most intimate activities of the KGB. Again, we went to our black market sources, now armed with this new knowledge. We believed that with the demise of the KGB, most of the safeguards protecting its records would be gone. Someone out there must have the knowledge and access to be able to supply them to us for a price. Over the course of the next 5 months, we employed our sources to try to obtain specifically these top-secret records of the KGB. This transaction between one of our Moscow contacts, an interpreter, and a local black market dealer yielded astonishing results. The location of this meeting is a textile factory in the Secret district of Moscow.
Sorry, I don't speak Russian, just a few words. I'm sorry, my friends.
This is the office of the Russian entrepreneur who owns the plant and uses it for both legitimate and illegal business.
Now, are the documents...
After introductions and some initial small talk, the dealer is asked whether the KGB materials are on the premises.
Задал сложную задачу. Доставить такого рода документы было очень непросто.
Я понимаю, именно поэтому мы обратились к вам, потому что Федор очень рекомендовал вас самым лучшим.
From a safe, documents are produced that relate to the films and tapes the dealer has promised to deliver.
Does this look... Do you think this is...
After an inspection of the documents and a cursory verification of their authenticity, the transaction is completed.
Посчитай деньги.
Okay, well, thank you. Спасибо.
Пожалуйста.
Nice to meet you.
Дмитрий Сергеевич, спасибо за вашу работу.
Money changes hands, and the tense group is led to another office where the films and tapes are said to be stored. And finally, the graphic films and tapes we had heard about surfaced. Coming up next, Americans betray their country for cash, and a Saudi Arabian sheikh is caught on film in a prelude to assassination.
What was once one of the most feared intelligence agencies in the world was also the largest. At its peak, the KGB had literally thousands of operatives working both within the Soviet Union and everywhere else on the planet.
Above the agency was the General Secretary of the Soviet Union. In the early 60s, the head of the KGB reported directly to Nikita Khrushchev. It was said that what was Khrushchev's opinion was the KGB's opinion. The Russian army defended the country's borders against military attack. But one of the primary tasks of the KGB was that of defending against political assault from the outside, especially from neighboring countries. At its southern border, Afghanistan historically was an ever-present concern for the USSR. Since its creation, the KGB spent a great deal of its resources influencing Afghan politics. One of the films obtained from our black market sources is a graphic illustration of one method used. In this film, which our experts have dated at around 1977, an unidentified Arab sheikh is being offered money and the services of a prostitute. In return, he is to use his influence to assist in the overthrow of Afghanistan's President Sardar Mohammed Daoud. The scene is being recorded by a hidden KGB camera for future use as blackmail if necessary. The KGB agent here is referring to an unsuccessful coup attempt in 1975. Presumably, the sheikh has the necessary connections to direct the Afghan clergy to exert their considerable influence on the Islamic populace to help effect another coup. At first, there is a brief misunderstanding in the arrangements.
Maybe I shouldn't. I'm not going to be.
As was promised, the first woman returns. Indeed, in April 1978, a bloody communist coup resulted in the killing of Daoud and his entire family. Russia finally invaded the country in 1979. Shortly afterward, the KGB was called on again.
Hafizullah Amin, the man who was the president of Afghanistan and who was forcibly overthrown and killed by the KGB squad, an assassination squad, in his own palace in the winter in December of 1979.
Ever since the first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, the Soviets' most pressing concern was the nuclear arms race. By 1960, it was clear to the Soviets that in the nuclear arena, they were not the superior power. They knew that the US had the capability to destroy them with a full-scale first strike. But the Russians believed that they could develop espionage capabilities superior to all other countries, and using them, they could accelerate their technological advancement and even gain advance warning of any strike before it occurred, so they might act first. The most effective spy is the one recruited from within the enemy's own ranks. The agency was expert in identifying and exploiting vulnerability. A primary weakness the Russians relied on was greed. The KGB let it be known that they would pay a high price for secrets. Then, just as they hoped, those who would betray for a price came to them. One who was drawn by the promise of cash was Joseph Hemlich, Jr. He worked at the American Embassy in Paris and had access to the KL-7 decoding machine, which contained top-secret American technology. And he found that selling secrets to the Soviets was all too easy.
Just opened up the phone book, got the address of the embassy, went to the embassy, walked in the door. There was a receptionist there, a little desk right inside a small foyer, and I told her I'd like to see the Soviet military attaché. They were virtually offering me unlimited money.
Hemlich sold secrets to the Soviets in 1963 and 1964, and found that the US government put almost no obstacles in his way.
Oh, it's real simple, you know. Like you're going to bring this stuff to us, tomorrow night at midnight. Let's say that was the time. And it was real easy. I just went and I took a box of rotors. I was on the night shift. And instead of taking one box, I took two boxes. And I dropped one off with them and took the other box to our little terminal station down at Rue Marbeuf, picked up their dirty ones to bring back, normal procedure. Stopped by, picked up the ones they had, went back to the office with them. There was no security.
Once the KGB had Heimlich in their grasp, they used not only cash as an incentive, but also the threat of exposure as an additional tool to keep the secrets coming.
So while they were holding an axe at you with one hand, they're saying, now to make you glad that we've got the axe, here's the money. The first thing they wanted was the machine. Of course, the machine's impossible to deliver. So then they pressured me to bring them a maintenance manual. Maintenance manual didn't seem all that important, but when I think back over it, was probably the most important thing.
For his work as a spy, the KGB paid Heimlich a total of $131,000. But the compromising of the KL7 code cost the US millions. Heimlich was arrested in 1980 and sentenced to life in federal prison. Another spy of the 1970s attracted by the promise of large sums of money was William Campilis. Even though he was only a low-level watch officer in Greece, he was able to steal and hand over to the KGB a copy of the manual of the Big Bird satellite, the world's most advanced spy satellite. The CIA allowed the missing manual to go undetected for over a year. Ronald Pelton worked for the super-secret National Security Agency for 14 years, helping oversee the interception of scrambled and coded radio messages inside the Soviet Union. He, too, was lured to betray the United States by the greed that the KGB had come to depend on. His betrayal began with this phone conversation with a Soviet embassy official in 1980, recorded by the KGB.
I have something I would like to discuss with you. I think that would be very interesting to you. Is there any way to do so in confidence or in privacy? I will come tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening. So that it will be dark when I come in.
It is interesting to note that the FBI also recorded this conversation but could not identify the caller. In another glaring example of extremely inept US security, nothing was done to intercept the unidentified caller when he went to meet the Soviets. The Russian voice in the conversation was that of Vitaly Urchenko. It was not until Urchenko defected in 1979 and began telling his story to investigators that Ronald Pelton was identified as the mystery caller. Before he was arrested, Pelton had conveyed to the Russians top-secret methods the United States used to intercept messages at the highest levels of Soviet command, seriously damaging American intelligence capabilities. In the 1980s, the KGB further refined its methods of persuading people to betray their countries. The KGB was extremely effective at using the lure of sex to seduce those with access to information and then trapping them with the threat of blackmail.
In addition to such tactics as imprisoning individuals, torturing and sometimes executing them, the KGB got its way by old-fashioned extortion.
In another film obtained from our black market sources and captured on KGB hidden cameras, we see this practice being put to use. Here, our analysts believe the man is a diplomat in the Spanish embassy in Moscow. The women are swallows, the term used in intelligence circles for those employed to seduce someone to become a spy. Here, the swallows have brought in a camera mounted in a purse or briefcase. Also, probably without telling the women, a second camera has been installed near the ceiling of the room. In this way, the KGB can be absolutely sure the swallows are not working for both sides. Usually, these operations all followed a predictable schedule. This was probably the first meeting between the man and these women. To him, it would seem like something that happened by chance. Perhaps the women met him in a hotel bar and invited him up to a room. In a day or so, one of the women would call the man and suggest they get together again. At this meeting, she would be accompanied by a KGB agent. The agent would request that the diplomat provide some information. If he refused, he would be informed about the filming of the previous encounter and forced to cooperate or be exposed. As one might expect, the KGB had a very good record of cooperation. Coming up next, a Russian spy in the Vatican. And when the new pope dies mysteriously, the KGB calls it assassination.
Though the headquarters of the KGB was in Lubyanka in Moscow, St. Petersburg was also a haven for spy operations. And during the time of the Tsars, the secret police agency that was the predecessor to the KGB operated here 24-hour-a-day stores to provide spies with disguises.
The robes of the priest were a favorite disguise of the KGB. They could easily conceal weapons or surveillance devices, and in most countries, the priest was considered above suspicion. In yet another startling revelation within the classified documents we obtained, the KGB took their use of the priest's disguise to a new level as they infiltrated one of the world's most sacred centers of religion, the Vatican. Why would this, of all places, be of such critical interest to the Russians? The answer is simple. The Vatican may be the most powerful political force in the world. Policies dictated by the Vatican affect 1 billion people spread across the globe on every continent, in comparison to less than 300 million under the direct influence of the US or the former USSR. Reigning at the top of this vast empire of followers is one man, the Pope, whose words and wishes are considered by his followers to have divine inspiration. No other person on the planet has such extraordinary power and influence. So, in 1972, the KGB formulated a bold plan to position one of their people inside the walls of the Vatican.
With that kind of knowledge, it would have been possible for the Soviet leaders to change or at least have an influence over certain world events.
An agent was sent to the Vatican posing as a Ukrainian priest, driven from his country by the communists for anti-communist rhetoric. He was quickly accepted by the pro-American Vatican clergy. After only a few months, he achieved his primary objective, gaining the confidence of the office of Cardinal Villot, the Secretary of State for Pope Paul VI. Villot was well known as the head of the pro-American contingent in the Vatican. The KGB assumed that he was in direct communication with the CIA. In this KGB film footage, on the right is the agent posing as a priest. On the left is the chief assistant to Cardinal Villot. The third man is actually another KGB agent. He is also seeking to gain access to the Cardinal. Most likely, he will provide misinformation.
Bene, bene, molto bene. Bravo, bravo, fa piacere. Sappiamo la sua intervista. Sì, sì, sì. Bene, bene. Molto positivo. Sappiamo
Again, the KGB used blackmail to cement the relationship. When Vilot's assistant is sent on his customary monthly trip to Milan, the KGB installs a camera in his hotel room. In typical KGB fashion, the priest is about to be set up. The film will assure his continued cooperation. Over several days, a woman becomes friendly with him and gains his trust. The film shows that the trap was well set. One night, the woman comes to his room to take him to a dinner meeting. While he is briefly away pouring drinks, she takes off her blouse. The film abruptly ends. But no matter what the outcome of the encounter was, the brief shot of this priest with a half-dressed woman in his room is damaging enough to guarantee future assistance in watching and influencing the powerful Vilot. Historically, attempts to control the hierarchy of Catholicism sometimes employed underhanded methods, even murder. Traditionally, poison was the preferred method. Some suspect it was the cause of the deaths of 3 popes in the last 60 years. In each case, the death was timed so as to have a great political significance. The list includes Pope Pius XI in 1939, Paul VI in 1978, and most recently his successor, John Paul I. Almost immediately after John Paul I took office, he proclaimed to close associates that one of his primary goals as Pope was to rid the Vatican Bank of corruption. And with that, he launched an investigation. But his potentially devastating probe would not have been the first to uncover criminal involvement in the Vatican's finances. Startling documents we received from our black market Russian sources tell of a previous secret U.S. Justice Department investigation into a mafia-controlled fraud scheme estimated to involve close to $1 billion. The money trail led agents to the Vatican Bank, specifically to the office of the director, Bishop Marcinkus. Finally, high government U.S. officials, including President Nixon himself, intervened and silenced the probe. Now the new pope was poised to uncover the scheme and the U.S. cover-up. The mafia, some in the Vatican and the U.S. government, and even the president had a major reason to keep this pope from continuing his work. And the CIA had another reason. John Paul was looking too favorably toward the Russians. His principal advisor was a very pro-Moscow cardinal named Benelli. Benelli had persuaded the Pope to consider renewing ties with the USSR. A private meeting was arranged between John Paul and a Russian Orthodox Archbishop, Nicodim. As the meeting began, coffee was poured. Nicodim took the first sip and almost immediately collapsed to the floor. His face was very contorted in a horrible and unnatural grimace, as if the death was very painful. The official doctor quickly proclaimed that the Russian had died from a massive coronary. But at the height of the Cold War, there were assassins skilled at making murder appear very much like a massive coronary. And two important facts pointed toward a cover-up. There was no autopsy to determine the cause of death, and the coffee the Archbishop drank was never collected for analysis. In Rome, the general public opinion was that the Pope had narrowly escaped being murdered only 10 days after he was elected. Further documents reveal that the KGB agreed. The agency employed their covert source inside the Vatican to keep an especially watchful eye on the Pope and those around him in the near future. His accounts afford an inside look into the next incredible events to come. In the next days, John Paul uncovered more of the intrigues in the Vatican. He learned that those implicated in the Vatican bank fraud, including the Mafia, would stop at nothing to save themselves. And possibly even more of a threat was the CIA, aggressively seeking to install a pro-American Pope using their connections in the Vatican. One of those implicated was Benelli's arch-rival, the pro-US Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Villot. On September the 28th, 1978, John Paul called a secret meeting with his top 4 cardinals to discuss the situation. Afterwards, the Pope was moved to take action. First, he ended the term of Cardinal Villot as Secretary of State. When John Paul retired that night, he took with him detailed notes of the secret meeting to review. At 5 a.m. the next morning, when the pontiff had not come out for his coffee as usual, his attendant peered inside his door. John Paul appeared to be sitting in bed with the light on, as if he were reading. Various papers were around him. But to the nun's horror, his face was frozen in the agonized contortion she had seen on the face of the dead Russian, Nikodim, only days before. After only 33 days as Pope, John Paul was dead. Coming up next, John Paul II wages a one-man war on communism, and the KGB strikes back with a vengeance. The KGB believed the shocking death of John Paul I could be nothing less than an assassination.
In the world of espionage and secret intelligence, both sides often knew what the other was up to. So in launching its own investigation into the assassination, the KGB had access to key sources and privileged information.
Again, the agency relied on its source inside the Vatican. Cardinal Villot, as the senior cardinal, now had become, in essence, the temporary pope. When John Paul was found dead, Villot first locked himself in the papal bedroom and collected the notes of the secret meeting, the pontiff's reading glasses, and the prescription medicines from his bedside table. Also taken were his slippers and the candies the pontiff often enjoyed while reading. None of these items were ever seen again. Then at 6:10 a.m., Villot ordered embalmers to be summoned. But shockingly, the embalmers arrived almost immediately. KGB sources estimate that given the distance the embalmers had to travel, they must have been contacted at 4:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the time that the attendant discovered the Pope. At 7:30 a.m., a public announcement was issued. The cause of death was heart failure, and the time of discovery was changed to 5:30. By the time of the announcement, the embalmers had already done their work, just as in the all too similar death of the Russian Archbishop only 23 days before. No autopsy was performed.
With all that we have unearthed here, the big question seems to be, what is the significance of what are clearly some very profound discoveries, and will we ever know the full story?
In the minds of those at the KGB, there was no doubt. The Pope had been assassinated, perhaps by the Mafia, but more likely by the CIA. 12 days after John Paul's funeral, Cardinal Villot assembled the 111 cardinals in the conclave to elect a successor. After the 8th ballot, white smoke billowed up from the Vatican, signaling that a pope had been elected. It also signaled a staggering defeat for the KGB. Led by Villot, the American contingent had executed a well-orchestrated plan to elect their chosen candidate. The new pontiff was a staunchly anti-communist Pole, John Paul II. The KGB Vatican sources report that only days after his election, the CIA was already briefing John Paul II about the details of the role he would play in their master plan to bring down communism. The concept was to systematically penetrate the regimes in Eastern Europe through their workers. It would start with Poland. The fiercely nationalistic Polish Pope agreed. The Vatican needed to supply funds for the rebelling trade unions. The Pope looked to the Vatican Bank. Its director, Bishop Marcinkus, under investigation by the previous Pope, had become a personal friend of John Paul II. Soon, millions of dollars began being siphoned into Poland from the Vatican Bank. And in Poland, the anti-communist Solidarity labor movement was born. In the spring of 1979, John Paul II traveled back to Poland. His charismatic speeches provided the fuel for the Solidarity movement to gain tremendous momentum. After he returned to the Vatican, the Polish Church became overnight an anti-communist steamroller. Priests' sermons motivated Catholics to the Solidarity cause. Leader Lech Walesa was inspired to lead with such vigor that he would later win a Nobel Peace Prize. Both the church and labor unions talked brazenly about revolution. By 1980, this Catholic worker fever began to spread to neighboring countries. Russia threatened to send a military force to intervene in Poland. John Paul II countered with a threat of his own. The Pope sent a handwritten letter to the USSR's President Brezhnev. In it, the pontiff threatened that if a Russian invasion should come, he would retire from the papacy and return to Poland to lead the resistance forces, giving his own life if necessary. The news of the Pope's brave proclamation drove the Solidarity fervor to even greater heights. It seemed one man was threatening to bring down communism single-handedly. The effectiveness of the grand plan of the CIA was amazing, even to those in the agency themselves. The only thing perhaps more surprising to the CIA was that the KGB had made no attempt to stop the Pope. But on May the 13th, 1981, Mehmet Ali Akka, a man wanted in Turkey for murder, stood outside the Vatican Basilica in the crowd, waiting for the Pope to ride through. As the Pope came by, Ali Akka pulled a pistol up and fired 3 times before being wrestled to the ground by the crowd. The pontiff was seriously wounded, but would recover to continue his papacy. At first, Ali Akka asserted he had acted on his own, But soon he admitted the shooting was part of a conspiracy masterminded by the KGB. When the jury announced Ali Akbar's conviction and life sentence, he seemed shocked that he had been left to bear the responsibility alone. Then he began laying out the precise details of the conspiracy to Italian investigators. He explained that he had been trained in Bulgaria and Syria by the KGB and the Bulgarian Secret Service. On November the 25th, 1982, Serge Ivanov Antonov, a Bulgarian national airline employee, was arrested and charged with involvement in the assassination attempt. Soon the list of those arrested included 3 other Bulgarians and 4 Turks. In spring of 1985, the trial of the 8 accused conspirators convened and more facts began to emerge. During the 10-month trial, Ali Akbar exhibited some bizarre behavior, but he remained consistent in testifying that he had been trained, assisted, and paid by the Bulgarian Secret Service and the KGB. Witnesses backed up many of his claims. Finally, to the amazement of many, the Italian court found that there was insufficient evidence to convict the 8 conspirators. But this should come as no surprise. The KGB would have carried out this operation under tighter security than almost any other. The head of the agency at the time of the assassination attempt was Yuri Andropov, who became leader of the USSR soon afterwards. If proof of the KGB's involvement under his direction was uncovered, it could very well have started a nuclear war. Still, all of the circumstantial evidence to this day and the assassin's own words implicate the KGB. And in 1990, Viktor Ivanovich Shemov, a KGB major who defected to the US, made a shocking admission. Before he escaped from Russia in 1980, he received an order to obtain all the information possible on how to get physically close to the Pope. The order was signed by Yuri Andropov himself. Coming up next, the KGB sets a trap but catches one of its own, and the first US Marine in 200 years to be seduced to betray his own country. Throughout the 1980s, the Soviet government spent more and more of its resources on intelligence, and the KGB rose to an even more powerful position. The thinking was that money spent creating an even more elaborate spy network would pay off in great dividends. With ever more powerful computers at their disposal, the KGB could amass the most extensive intelligence database the world has ever seen.
The vast intelligence-gathering machine that was the KGB was compartmentalized, so secrets could be kept secret. Few individuals knew what other agents in other departments were working on at any time.
Sometimes this caused mix-ups and duplication of efforts. In these KGB documents, we learned that a Russian army officer shown in the film, obtained from the same source, is under surveillance. He has been observed over a period of time, exhibiting some unusual behavior for an army man. Traveling to Moscow and St. Petersburg and meeting discreetly with unidentified individuals. The woman that has just arrived is someone he has become involved with recently, he thinks, by chance. Actually, she has been sent by the KGB to try to get information about his suspicious activities.
Не то, что устал. С вами никто не устанет. Когда вы приходите в возраст сразу.
Серьезно?
Да. Второй год.
Добрый день, спасибо. Далее, да? А вот
Eventually, the two arrange to meet later at his hotel room, where a camera has been installed without his knowledge.
Приятный какой сюрприз.
такая холодная на улице, как замерзла.
Ну здесь потеплее, давайте вашу.
У вас тепло.
Вашу шубу.
Спасибо.
Замечательный план.
Давайте.
Да.
Спасибо. А вы занимаетесь?
Да как я занимаюсь и читаю.
Again, the woman attempts to extract more information.
Извините, что я опоздала.
Да не время. По-женски вы не опоздали. Все у нас все 15 минут. Чем же мне вас угостить? Вина, может быть?
С удовольствием.
Подумаю.
А я в математике совсем ничего не смыслю.
The man is getting suspicious. What the woman and her KGB handlers do not realize is that this man is not only an army officer, he is also a KGB agent, investigating possible security leaks within the army. Being very familiar with KGB tactics, he sees all the signs that this is one of the agency's operations.
Работы было много.
Да, устала.
Не то, что устал. С вами никто не устанет. Когда вы приходите в возраст сразу. Ну, знаете, я подумал, когда был помоложе, здесь сказалось. Одну минутку, Окей?
As technology grew more and more advanced, KGB agents utilized the most sophisticated spy equipment from all over the world. But their basic methods remained the same. Sex and blackmail were still two of the KGB's most effective tools. This man was blackmailed while working as an Air Force cipher clerk in the Canadian Embassy in Prague, Czechoslovakia.
It was a stupid thing to do, and I did it. I got caught doing it by somebody that shouldn't have, or shouldn't have. Well, he indicated that they had had photographs of me, and, you know, that he would contact me at some future date. It was just the fact they confronted me with the fact that they had pictures and photographs of me doing this homosexual act with the other individuals involved.
In intelligence circles, the use of women in sexual situations to snare a victim is called a honey trap. U.S. Marine Clayton Lonetree was a willing victim of a classic KGB honey trap operation. Lonetree was the grandson of a chief of the Winnebago Indians of Wisconsin and the nephew of a Marine who won the Medal of Honor in the Korean War. In 1984, after completing the embassy service course and being given a security clearance at the top secret level, Lonetree was sent to Moscow as a guard for the U.S. Embassy. As a standard procedure, he signed a non-fraternization agreement and promised to report all contacts with Soviet citizens. One day he met 25-year-old Violetta Sena, a pretty Russian employee of the embassy. They soon became friends, and their friendship developed into a sexual relationship. Violetta introduced Lonetree to her Uncle Sasha in January 1986. Uncle Sasha's real identity was Alexei Yefimov, a KGB intelligence officer. According to Lonetree, Uncle Sasha asked him if he would like to be a friend of the Soviet Union. When Lonetree answered yes, Sasha began asking a lot more questions, and the young Marine obliged, telling whatever he knew. All he divulged will never be known. We do know he gave a detailed layout of the U.S. ambassador's office, and he identified and gave detailed information about Marines and various people who worked at the U.S. Embassy after Sasha showed him covert snapshots. In the spring of 1986, Lone Tree was relocated to the U.S. Embassy in Vienna, Austria. Sasha followed him. Again, Lone Tree provided detailed information about this embassy and personnel. Then his betrayal grew to another level. He began stealing classified documents and providing them to Sasha. Some of the papers compromised the U.S. negotiations for the Mutual Balanced Forces Arms Reduction Agreement with Russia. Finally, in December 1986, apparently guilt got the better of Lone Tree, and he contacted the U.S. CIA station chief and admitted what he had been doing. The American public was shocked to learn that a U.S. Marine had betrayed his country. Lone Tree was the first Marine traitor in 200 years. Because of the uproar surrounding the case, all 28 Marine guards were removed from Moscow. The official view taken by the Russians, on the other hand, was one of amusement.
It is indeed funny. Brave Marines are called back from the American embassy because they allegedly are unable to resist the charms of fair-haired spies.
Unofficially, though, the KGB regarded the Lone Tree operation as a major victory, giving them their first access ever inside the U.S. Embassy. Lone Tree was convicted and court-martialed in 1987 for his offenses. He was sentenced to 30 years, but because he cooperated with counterintelligence officers after his arrest, he was released in February 1996 after having served only 9 years. Coming up next, a bumbling FBI agent sells out his country for sex in his car. And John Walker commits the most damaging betrayal of the Cold War.
The austere building behind me once housed what was undoubtedly the largest and most feared intelligence agency in the world.
Here, during the Cold War, KGB masterminds built the most effective network of foreign espionage agents the world had ever seen. Fortunately, for the other side, not all of the KGB's recruits turned into successful spies. Richard Miller was an FBI agent working for the Foreign Counterintelligence Division in Los Angeles. In 1982, he was an 18-year veteran of the agency with a knack for embarrassing himself and the FBI. As a father of 8, he was always scrambling for money, so he sold Amway cleaning products out of his official FBI car. He stole candy from a 7-Eleven convenience store. He was suspended for being 50 pounds overweight. Once he lost his gun and FBI credentials. Another time he forgot the key in the lock of the FBI office when he left for the night. But he took his embarrassing record to a new low when he met a beautiful Russian immigrant living in West Los Angeles, Svetlana Ogornikova. The FBI considered Svetlana to be a contact agent who spotted potential recruits for the KGB. As such, she was already under surveillance by the FBI. Agents were surprised to discover that her meetings began to include one of their own, Richard Miller, who they assumed was on official business. In June 1984, Svetlana returned to the Soviet Union for a visit. There, she met with KGB officials and told them about the relationship she was cultivating with an FBI agent. And she offered her services to turn him into a mole. When she returned to Los Angeles, Svetlana asked Miller to provide classified documents to her Russian friends. He negotiated for $15,000 in cash and $50,000 in gold. The two traveled to San Francisco, And while Miller waited outside, Svetlana went into the Soviet consulate to deliver a classified FBI document. In September, the FBI began close surveillance of Svetlana and Agent Miller. They secretly photographed the two together. They videotaped meetings in their cars. They shot aerial photos of their many rendezvous at a little league field and the routes they drove afterwards. Their phones were tapped and bugs were placed in Miller's car. The FBI's extensive surveillance gave them an inside look at a developing espionage plot driven by greed and sex. The bugs revealed that Miller and Svetlana had sex in his car almost every time they met.
Wait!
Too much? No, too much. It's just right. I will eat you for my dessert.
Svetlana received a telephone call monitored by the FBI wiretap from Alexander Grishin, a KGB official using the cover of Soviet Consul General in the Russian consulate in San Francisco.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Can I speak to Svetlana?
Yes. I'm speaking.
Is it Svetlana?
Yes.
Здравствуйте, Svetlana.
In the conversation, they use code words and very ambiguous terms to confuse possible listeners, but the meaning is clear enough. Grishin is trying to arrange for Svetlana to take Miller and as many secret documents as he can bring to Vienna for a meeting with KGB officials he discreetly calls her acquaintances.
Да.
И еще, значит, чтобы ваш друг взял все, что может, как говорили, так?
Да.
Вот. А решим с вами так. Раз уж отдых устраивается там, в Европе, так?
Да, устраивает.
Plans for the trip were finalized.
Да.
Вот. И они будут вас ждать, чтобы во всем вам помочь.
А, хорошо.
Это будет удобнее и для вас, и для друга.
Да.
Давайте так договоримся, что я ровно через неделю
Да.
вам позвоню.
Miller received his new passport and an Austrian visa in preparation. But before the departure date, Miller discovered that he was under FBI surveillance. Knowing he was about to be arrested, he went to his superiors first with his own version of what had been going on. Miller tried to convince investigators that he had mounted his own sting operation to trap the KGB in order to bolster his sagging reputation as an agent. He said he was coming forward now because his operation was successfully in place. Of course, the FBI was unconvinced by his honorable intentions. He was charged with espionage and other crimes along with Svetlana. Svetlana Orgodenikova was convicted and received 18 years in prison. Alexander Grishin went home to Russia to be put in charge of all non-diplomatic KGB spies throughout the world. After one mistrial, a conviction, and a double life-term sentence, and several appeals, Richard Miller ended up with a 20-year sentence. And after a very unimpressive career as an FBI agent, his impact as a spy was rated by US intelligence agencies as also very unimportant. But for every foreign spy the KGB developed that proved ineffective, there were many more that produced great dividends. The 1980s saw a dramatic increase in the number of communist spies at work in the world. It was estimated that there were over 1,300 KGB operatives in the US alone. Soon it became obvious that counterintelligence agents of the democratic societies known as spy watchers were being seriously outmanned. 1985 became known as the Year of the Spy, when there were a record number of 14 arrests for espionage in the US alone. The most celebrated and serious case involved a father and son team and 3 associates who sold some of the country's most sensitive military secrets to the Soviet Union. For 6 months, the FBI had been investigating John A. Walker Jr., a former Navy chief warrant officer, after a tip from his ex-wife. One day in May, Walker was observed driving in an effort to dry clean himself, the FBI term for attempting to lose a pursuer. He pulled over, started again, made U-turns, and performed numerous other driving tricks. Even from their surveillance airplane, he was out of visual contact for 2 hours as he drove through heavy forest in rural Maryland. Meanwhile, FBI agents trained in spotting dead drop sites or locations where articles are left to be picked up later by KGB agents went into action. They examined every bit of trash on the sides of the roads Walker had been traveling. At the same time, they had to stay in constant contact with agents watching Walker so they could get out of sight if he started driving in their direction. The big breakthrough came when FBI agent Bruce Brahe suddenly found what he was looking for. It was a classic type of Soviet dead drop. A dry paper bag with clean trash inside, including a rinsed-out soft drink bottle. And underneath was a letter to the Soviets and secret documents from the U.S. aircraft carrier Nimitz. This set off arrests of John Walker and his son Michael, a Navy seaman. Later, Walker's brother, retired Navy Lieutenant Commander Arthur Walker, and friend Jerry Whitworth, the retired Navy radio man, were also arrested. Soon the details began to emerge and the world learned of the massive breach of security. Walker and his espionage ring had been delivering secrets to the Soviets for nearly 20 years with relative ease. The most damaging items passed were the top-secret decoding keys enabling the Soviets to break supposedly unbreakable ciphers. It was very likely that information from Walker's earlier espionage activities was passed on to the North Vietnamese and was then directly responsible for U.S. deaths in the Vietnam War. Over the years, as Walker and his ring continued to sell the code keys, the U.S. defense capabilities were severely compromised. KGB defector Vitaly Yurchenko told his American debriefers in 1985, "It was the greatest case in KGB history. We deciphered millions of your messages. If there had been a war, we would have won it." Walker himself quipped, "Kmart has better security than the U.S. Navy." Walker received a life sentence. His accomplices received lesser sentences. The U.S. was forced to buy new coding machines at a cost of close to $100 million. As computer capabilities for storage and processing information continued to increase, the KGB no longer had to limit themselves to the major powers. Now they could extend their intelligence web into every country in the world. No documentation was obtained along with this KGB film, but based on their clothes, our experts believe the men are probably mid-level diplomats from an East African country at around about 1986. This appears to be the beginning of a honey trap operation. It shows the lengths that the KGB would go to influence the politics of even the most obscure countries around the world. Coming up next, Aldrich Ames, the CIA officer who lived a lavish lifestyle, and the agents that paid for it with their lives.
In addition to planting espionage agents all over the world, one of the other jobs of the KGB was to spy on Soviet citizens. Anyone suspected of harboring dissenting political views was considered a fair target.
The KGB spent considerable resources on surveillance of those who did not possess information from the enemy. Rather, they were suspected of supplying Russia's secrets to the enemy. Anyone caught spying, and sometimes those only suspected of espionage, were punished swiftly and severely. The KGB's most effective resource for uncovering spies was the mole, an agent already working within the ranks of an enemy intelligence agency. Successful moles were treated extremely well by the Soviets because they could often provide the identities of Russians that were betraying their country. In the spring of 1994, American counterintelligence agents finally trapped the KGB's most valuable mole of the Cold War. On February the 21st, the FBI arrested CIA officer Aldrich Hazen Ames along with his wife Rosario. Only then did the massive amount of the damage he inflicted on U.S. security begin to come to light. This was the FBI and CIA's most embarrassing moment. As the head of the Soviet division of the CIA's counterintelligence section, Ames had access to the country's most secret information, which he handed over to the Soviets. And not only was he the highest CIA official ever to be arrested for espionage, he had been committing his treason for 9 years undetected. Among the more than 500 items seized by federal agents in searches of the CIA officer's home were 10 pieces of chalk. Routinely, Ames left chalk marks on mailboxes in an established system of signals to his Russian handlers. At the same time, Ames was sending out all the telltale signals that he was a spy. He and his wife lived far beyond the means of his salary. They had a $540,000 house, 2 condominiums, a farm in Colombia, and expensive cars. In what could only be gross incompetence, these red flags went unnoticed by the CIA and FBI for all those years. Altogether, Ames had received over $2.7 million, more than twice as much as any other spy or spy ring uncovered to date. This was an indication of just how valuable he was to the Soviets. Aldrich Ames supplied the Russians with some of the CIA's most closely held secrets, including the identities of Soviets who were spying for the United States. In 1985, one by one, operatives in Russia were disappearing. This KGB film shows Adolf Torkachev, a Russian secretly working for the US, being arrested in Moscow. In an ironic twist, the man considered to be the most valuable informant for the US was also betrayed by Ames, the KGB's most valuable spy. General Dmitry Polyakov is said to have supplied the CIA 25 file drawers worth of Russian secrets from the 1960s to the 80s. CIA inventors built him a special encoding device. Information could be typed in, encrypted, and then transmitted to a receiver in the US Embassy in Moscow. Soon after Ames started providing information to the Soviets in 1985, Polyakov disappeared. The KGB did not admit that Polyakov was executed for espionage until 1990. Altogether, at least 10 Russians working for the US were arrested and executed. And the damage was not limited to within the Soviet Union. Ames' CIA information exposed spies in other countries as well. Documents obtained along with this film state that information from a mole in the CIA led the KGB to investigate this East German army officer. The mole must have been Ames. In the film, a KGB swallow is seducing the East German in view of 2 hidden cameras. After the officer is asleep, the woman begins searching through his belongings for evidence that he is selling information. According to documents obtained with this film, this East German officer was indeed caught with classified papers in his possession and was arrested and presumably executed. With such a large number of operatives disappearing, it was obvious to U.S. intelligence agencies at that time that the KGB had acquired a high-level mole within their ranks. Yet it took an incredible 9 years to uncover that the mole was Ames. For his crimes, he was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole.
The concept of obtaining incriminating information on political figures was not unique to the KGB or even the Russians. Intelligence agencies throughout history have used secrets to influence or discredit targeted individuals.
But the Soviet Union refined the science of intelligence to its highest degree. During the Cold War, Russia completely penetrated all levels of government in every country in the free world. Although the KGB was the most well-known, it was not the only espionage entity run by the former USSR. Another agency just as massive, but even more secret than the KGB, was the GRU, carrying out military intelligence. While the KGB collected information on political figures and influenced politics around the globe, the GRU gathered intelligence essential for achieving military objectives. Some of the activities of the GRU were aimed at achieving objectives in various ongoing conflicts, such as Afghanistan. But the major mission of the GRU was to prepare for a future war with the country always perceived as Russia's #1 enemy.
In time of Cold War beginning, in the mid, in the end, actually all time of our military service, we were used in military preparation of former Soviet Union for the future war against America.
Besides their military education, GRU operatives underwent 3 years of exhaustive training. They learned to use all the tools and techniques of the spy, and they became experts in explosives and assassination. During the training period, the agency employed the services of the KGB to conduct surveillance on GRU personnel. In this way, any security weaknesses in the GRU ranks were uncovered, and at the same time, agents learned how to detect and avoid surveillance. The GRU recruit lived in constant suspicion of all those he came into contact with. In this surveillance film, a KGB swallow has been signed to try and seduce and extract information from a GRU operative.
Сейчас я скажу сначала выпью за знакомство.
Хорошо. Тебя есть такие возможности? Привести меня в Париж? И еще куда-нибудь?
Еще пить хочешь? Сейчас я вернусь, я очень лучше напиться и включу музычку.
Окей, ты можешь поставить мне бокал. Спасибо.
The GRU agent has been well trained to look for bugs and hidden cameras. The Swallow uses a high-tech device for the early 1990s, a miniature camera mounted in her purse. Also, a tiny camera is mounted in a light fixture on the ceiling. Many GRU recruits lost their positions as a result of such KGB stings. Unmarried men were considered a security risk, so only married recruits were allowed. Having unauthorized relations outside of marriage was also seen to pose a security threat. The GRU held their agents to extremely high standards. This GRU agent has not detected the surveillance devices and has fallen prey to the skillful Swallow. He will be reprimanded and removed from the agency. And if this Swallow is able to persuade him to divulge his GRU identity or any classified information, his punishment could be severe. Once fully trained, the GRU agents were moved to assignments in foreign countries. Some were given diplomatic covers and went to work in embassies. Others assumed positions as journalists. One was Stanislav Lunev, a former GRU colonel who in 1992, after 20 years with the agency, would become Russia's highest-ranking military officer to defect. In his book, and in an exclusive interview with us, Lunev gives a first-hand look into the GRU and reveals some shocking facts.
In the United States, I worked in Washington, D.C. operational area under the same cover as a TASS news agency correspondent. It's a very good cover because, you know, between journalists and spies, real spies, there are a lot of common because all of them are looking for news and for real information.
Once in position in the field, the GRU agents had various tasks. One was to help coordinate terrorist campaigns to destabilize unfriendly governments, especially the US. GRU officials have now revealed that during the Vietnam War, the agency invested over $1 billion promoting the anti-war campaign in the US. In preparing for future war, a major part of the GRU agents' work was laying the groundwork for Russian special forces, the Spetsnaz. These elite troops under the GRU would penetrate countries when the war became imminent to perform military sabotage. Some would blow up strategic targets such as power stations, bridges, and communication centers. Others would form assassination squads to kill American leaders and their families. In order to bring the Spetsnaz in when required, the GRU needed to assure they would have access to cross the border into the US. For this, they relied on the expertise of the KGB. The KGB excelled at compromising borders of unfriendly countries. They needed to be able to consistently position their spies and smuggle out information. Again, the agency often used sex and blackmail to accomplish its goals. In this hidden camera film, the man on the right is a KGB agent acting as a raven, a male whose job is to seduce someone to commit espionage. This raven is in the process of setting up a Mexican border guard.
I'll get it replaced. Okay. Alright, more. So it's very interesting.
Once this border guard was hooked, KGB agents could freely cross into the US from Mexico at this station. This information would then be passed on to the GRU so they too could use the access to bring in agents and the Spetsnaz when they were called for.
So, will you call me? I call you. You will? Anyway, I'll contact you, you know what I mean? I'll call you. I'll call you. I'll find you, then I'll call you. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Coming up next, nuclear bombs hidden on the soil of the US and other nations, still ready to be activated.
Destructive power of these tactical nuclear devices would be approximately equal to bombs which destroy Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
With international tensions heightened just before a war, it would be very difficult for the Spetsnaz to bring weapons into the US. In preparing during peacetime, the GRU agents in place in America stockpiled weapons and explosives.
These Special Operation Forces commanders are very highly trained military professionals, and they will come here when real tension would be in place. They need to have very special weapon system to destroy very highly protected targets. So they will have nuclear weapons, chemical, biological, other weapon system.
In the GRU's war scenario, the Spetsnaz assassination squads would spring into action once a nuclear missile launch became imminent.
If a real war would be in place, you know that after Russian missiles will leave their positions back in Russia, in few minutes after this once, American political leaders would be on their way for evacuation and will disappear on the Air Force One, Air Force Two, Air Force 3, and other airplanes, and could be out to be reached by Russian weapon system. So they need to be eliminated or assassinated on their way to evacuation.
The most frightening weapons to be used by the Spetsnaz were the small nuclear devices that have become known as the nuclear suitcase bombs.
It's necessary to say that it would be very heavy briefcase because it would be more than 100 pounds, very close to 200 pounds. But these devices could be delivered to this country by regular way as drugs are coming to this country. Will look like, you know, very popular in this country, or some kind of cooler. So it could be camouflaged like very typical ordinary things. And I don't think that somebody will pay too much attention at these devices which could look like very ordinary and regular stuff.
These weapons could be moved easily by one person, but had awesome destructive capabilities.
Destructive power of these tactical nuclear devices would be approximately equal to bombs which destroy Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Once they were smuggled into the US and other enemy countries, the weapons were stored in safe places until the Spetsnaz could retrieve them in time of war. It is estimated that a frightening number of these nuclear devices were positioned in the US and other countries.
And you know that Russian Federation former National Security Council chief years ago, he authorized special inspection to make a count of these devices. And he didn't find more than 100 of these devices inside Russia. So these more than 100, more exactly about 130 tactical nuclear devices are already established in foreign countries, and not only in the United States.
In all probability, these nuclear devices remain hidden in their secret locations, as ready for use today as they were during the Cold War. For decades, the world lived under the threat of nuclear catastrophe during the Cold War. Today, the Cold War is long over, but the potential for nuclear terrorism is possibly even more frightening.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union, many changes have come to Moscow and the rest of Russia. Gone is communism and the strict controls that once governed daily life here.
Now, in a shattered and chaotic economy, people are trying desperately to scrape out a living in any way they can. Anything and anyone can be bought for a price. It seems all too conceivable that a terrorist with enough money could locate and hire a GRU operative with the knowledge and codes to finally retrieve and activate one or more of the nuclear suitcases, with catastrophic results. But an even greater threat lies back in the former Soviet Union itself. When the USSR fell apart, a large number of nuclear weapons became stranded in the newly independent states, under the control of a variety of questionable regimes.
Just now, nobody can tell exactly how many tactical nuclear weapons was located on the territory of these republics and was withdrawn from these republics to Russia in 1992, 1993, because documentation about location was disappeared in time of the USSR disintegration.
These nuclear weapons are very vulnerable to falling into the hands of terrorists who can pay the right price.
For terrorists, it's not very difficult to buy something from tactical nuclear arsenal, let's say from former Soviet Union. For them, it would be very difficult technically to use these devices.
But those with the necessary knowledge to use these weapons could also be available to terrorists.
In time when Russian scientists just now trying to find job everywhere because they are not employed in Russia, this is real danger, because these guys could be hired by international terrorists which could cover themselves like Iran, Iraq or other countries.
Probably the most frightening scenario of the post-Cold War era is one where some of these nuclear weapons fall into the hands of terrorists. It might already have happened. Saudi exile Osama bin Laden has been called the most dangerous man on earth. He is a millionaire terrorist who has branded America and its allies as infidels and vowed they must be destroyed. In 1996, from his base in Afghanistan, he issued a fatwa, a religious decree declaring war on America.
بالنسبة لأمريكا ركزنا عليها في البيان السابق.
The call to wage war against America was made because America has spearheaded a crusade against Islam, sending thousands of its troops to the land of the two holy mosques, meddling in Saudi affairs and politics, and supporting its oppressive, corrupt, and tyrannical regime. These are the reasons for singling out America as a target. Along with 16 other defendants, bin Laden was indicted by the US government for masterminding the 1998 bombings of US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. The indictment stated that he has made efforts to obtain the components of chemical and nuclear weapons. Now information that has trickled down from Israeli intelligence agencies suggests that bin Laden already has nuclear weapons in his possession.
It's possible to believe that bin Laden bought some of these devices from former Soviet Union republic.
Today, the independent former Soviet states are more concerned with economic survival than safeguarding the nuclear weapons they inherited. The new Russia is also in too much political and financial turmoil to help. It seems that the Western countries must themselves bear the responsibility to ensure that these weapons are found and destroyed before disaster strikes. Negotiating that will undoubtedly be a very expensive but necessary proposition. But before any of that can take place, we first need to obtain an accurate accounting of how many weapons existed and where they were before the breakup of the Soviet Union. To achieve this, we will have to investigate even deeper into the volumes of Russia's state secrets.
With all that has come out of the former Soviet Union since the fall of communism, we still have only a glimpse into the vast holdings of secret information the KGB had in its possession. While we may never know the full truth or have access to all the intelligence gathered by our former enemies, we can be sure that they knew a lot more than we may have thought. We hope that you've learned a few secrets yourselves here in Russia. Thanks for joining us.